This next session then, which was going to go for about 30 minutes, was similar to this morning's session where we asked the presenters to be available, to be able to respond to questions from the audience and also to reflect on anything else that they wanted to, that they might have missed out on their presentations, but their thoughts have been triggered by hearing other presenters. So do we have any, do we have all the presenters available? That's the first thing. And the second is there's you and yeah, I guess you and Peter and Joe are there. So in person.
So Rakita, Peter.
Yep, from this morning. Yep, great. Yeah. So let's all come back as a big big group.
Because that works out very well. Because I actually have something for afterwards.
To
present.
All right. Yeah, get them up there. Yep. So, did we have any questions from the audience online?
That's what I'm thinking. Any questions? Yes, sir. I think we're pretty good here at the moment.
Pretty good. Okay, so nothing's come in from any of the virtual audience at all? No.
Oh,
look,
do you have any questions?
Most of the presentations have been fairly self-explanatory anyhow. They've been, sort of excellent, and they cover off on all the issues. I guess as we in this afternoon session, we talked a lot about, cultural infusion, which I thought was a great little term, and also cultural competency, and how do we respond by privileging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's experiences, lived experience and living experience, and also our thoughts in that process. So that was really good, and I see that we have one hand up there. Who's that from? Felicity.
Hi, Uncle Tom. First of all, I would like to thank you so much for today, for sharing your wisdom. It's such an honour to meet you. I'm now going to hand over to Associate Professor Carmen Parham, as she was unexpectedly on screen during a video to say hello to Uncle Joe.
I thought that was her sitting down there. I couldn't quite get it. On my little iPad, everybody's stamp size, so it's very difficult. Hi, Carmen. Lucky I didn't say anything bad about you, eh?
Surprise.
Good to see everyone. Look, I just want to thank the last presenters for your presentations. I thought it was really great, and similarly, I just acknowledge the Durali team, and in particular John, for organising this. And I was really, probably a question for the whole panel in regards to we've travelled down the track, particularly around developing culturally safe spaces, or cultural competencies. And I'm just wondering, what are they thoughts like to really move that agenda to ensure that spaces are sustainably safe, I suppose is probably the word that I'm looking for. I'm just keen to see what the panel thinks about that. Thank you.
Okay, anyone from the panel want to respond?
Yeah, look, thank you for that question. Feels like Q&A, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what we're on about.
Look, we're working at the moment on extending that further, the model of cultural responsiveness beyond mental health. One of the things we find within my discipline of psychology, we love to measure things. Like Joe was saying earlier, we're the most measured, assessed people on the face of the planet. But psychologists are still doing that stuff. But we've also designed a measure that will actually assess people's cultural responsiveness. So on that that design that you saw, the wheel, of cultural responsiveness, it will be dimensional as well as being non-binary and non-linear. And people are going to get to see just, okay, where do I need to work on myself? And go away with that. And when they start seeing the numbers, they might start to sit up and listen a bit, hopefully. Anyone else want to say anything?
Yeah, Carmen, I just, yeah, I see, how you going? I just believe that institutions are so intrinsic in racism in Western society that it's more covert now than it has been before. And to break that down, you've got to continually assess the cultural safety within those organisations. Universities is one of them, but there's Western society in general is I think the referendum was a good example of the intrinsic racism that is still available in Australia if you want to have a look for it. And we need to work continually to break that down.
We have a comment here on the chat from Elizabeth. Response-based practice originating in Canada refers to the colonial code and suggests that all Western models of therapy and healing are trapped by this code, and it's privileging therapists.
You know, the
Power of funding and the state's institutions. First Nations social emotional wellbeing is such a welcomed resistance and challenge to that code for all peoples. Does the panel think that First Nations approaches are changing mainstream approaches and worldviews?
Hello, Carmen. It's Rakita. Do you remember me?
That way.
No, I think to respond to that, I had to really understand what healing is, because healing was such a Western imposed concept of what does it mean to be well. And I think that by our constant presence in the systems, or the rubbing or the friction in the systems, to try and continue to privilege voice, hold up that political, cultural integrity, I think we are working towards unsettling the code. But I think we need more capacity into understanding, well, what does healing look like when we stop comparing it to Western frameworks of what being well means? How do we actually move beyond just sort of the measuring and the, addressing the gaps and all that kind of stuff, moving away from that to be, what does healing mean? And I think that's where Pete really lended himself to ending on country. Have you just thought about going back to country? I think that's coming more and more. And I'm really, I suppose, frightened of appropriation, but it's kind of figuring out how do we keep building up our capacity to aspire our young people, because I think they're the ones that hold the solutions. I think they're the ones that are actually going to move us through some of the things that, Heart Foundation or whoever, not these people, sorry, but, people rattle their heads. Oh, how do we close the gap? Oh, how do we do this? But I really think the young people are the ones that they're going to be able to help solve some of those really tricksy things. And yeah, is that a response?
That's pretty good. I also have something to add to that as well. So in terms of this idea of, measuring what healing is, that sort of thing. When I first started my PhD, I was looking at an Aboriginal perspective of solastalgia. That's just, I had no experience at that point, and started doing a literature review on solastalgia, and it was extremely complicated because even though there was literature out there, the language was different, that sort of thing. Anyway, the conclusion of that literature review was there is no Aboriginal perspective. There is no blanket, perspective that we can label on top of anything. To say that something comes from, an Aboriginal perspective is harmful and very much not culturally responsive or respectful whatsoever. So if we are to, find that when we're looking at a word, is there an Aboriginal perspective of solastalgia? No, there's not. Well, it's the same as healing. There is no one size fits all healing approach. It depends on the person. It depends on the lived experience, that nature versus nurture, or nature with nurture. Everything that kind of, outlines who you are is your healing process is going to be different to the next person. And I think that's, there we go.
Could I just add something there too? I think what you're touching on too, Kasani, is that the social and emotional wellbeing model is a holistic model. And I think it's making an impact, to answer your question, because we're moving, I think, starting to move away from that Western idea of illness as things like diagnosis, treatment, and just simple treating the presenting problems. I think we're starting to look more holistically. I tend to be hopeful that that's happening more. And I think such as the model that you saw, and I know others in this room also use that model. And I think it's going to put it out there.
Felicity.
Yeah, so just a bit of feedback. There's a growing trend at the moment that particularly when, health departments are jumping on the bandwagon of, oh, we've heard wonderful things about traditional healers. We're going to bring them in. And it's like, well, you've got to step back because depending on the country that you're on, it's a breach of cultural protocol. And so it's like, oh, look, we're just going to jump. This is going to be ours and we're going to bring it to the world. But they don't think to step back and say, well, is this actually appropriate for this community? And once again, it's where does community get a voice? Where does community initiate, lead the conversations and the decision making? It still seems to be this, particularly since the voice referendum, is this top-down approach. You need, you will, which I spend a lot of time being very feisty and pushing back on.
Similar to the cultural fire burning workshops, one comment that I had from Arnie Sue Blacklock actually was that they had the Rural Fire Service, did a great job. They thought they were doing the right thing. They brought in a cultural fire burning workshop into Tingha. They weren't from that country. And Arnie Sue stood up there and she said, we know how to burn. We know our country. You're not from here. I'm sorry, but we can't have you trying to teach us what we already know. Your way is different to our way. And, that's it. Yeah, it's extremely important. All right, was there anyone? Any other comments or questions?
I've got a question.
Oh, we have John.
It's a slight diversion from the theme you've been following up, but I've obviously really enjoyed that. But I was also just reflecting on some of the speakers before lunch talking about reciprocity. I think it came up in a number of the talks, and I guess I was just really interested in how can we, just any thoughts about how we could do that better, and how could we maybe embed that more fully in our research? What are some of the ways we could do that? Because I think it probably means different things to different researchers, and it's, I think, more than just paying people. What does that mean, and how can we do it better?
I think it's one of the things is because to do the research in the first place, you've got to build a relationship and you need to maintain that relationship. You just don't go in there and befriend people and get your research and don't come back. You give the research back and you maintain relationships continuing. That's part of reciprocity for me.
Hmm. I think it's similar to that strain of thought. It's like thinking about the practical components of, okay, well, if we're going to do research in the community, we've developed the relationships. One of the aunties always told me, she said, you know, you'll do something for me or I'll do something for you. But because of the layers of it, you might not actually end up doing something for that person that helped you out, but you might actually also be obligated to someone else within that family, within that context. So it's kind of, there's always, I suppose, just being available and open to being able to respond and be, you know, accountable or held to not just the people that you've been friends with, but the layers, like, because your name will be in the community or will be present within that community, I suppose. But I think another thing is that idea of, you know, taking the words have power, the stories. It's very like, we take your research, we're going to run away with it. But it's more taking that research back and embedding it into the stories of where it belongs and building on the knowledge through that process. But I also find it really empowering that we can see mob come through, like Kasani and myself go through PhD degrees, and having those mentors that help us show us the way. And, you know, Carmen was my first at Katzenham conference many years ago. She was like, you know, it's real deadly. Like, she was really encouraging, like having those people as well, having those systems in place so that when we find those young people that actually want to go do their PhD, the systems shows them how they can navigate it to get into there. Like, you know, trying to find those ways to bend the rules and be accountable to the actual systems that we work in, I suppose. Yep.
I think too, John, universities have got to be acknowledging now and accountable for the fact that researchers do have to be immersed in community and do have to be involved with people at community level. My experience fairly recently was that the university doesn't really understand that and doesn't understand that very well, that it takes us time sometimes to build those relationships. And they say, oh, well, you've got to finish your PhD in 3 years or whatever it might be, or ethics is going to take longer because it's got to go through Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council as well, who also want to see the draft before you submit it to a publisher. So I think universities have got to understand that's a part of the process too, and that it's going to take a bit longer because of our cultural obligations.
I think for me, one of the key components of reciprocity is that engagement, is creating or being involved with meaningful research, not practicing extractive research. It needs to have a reason behind it that's going to, you know, fulfill a need or, you know, be worth it for the community to engage in, you know, and something that they can, you know, tangibly see the outcome of, so that then there can be those, you know, feelings of being involved in something bigger and something that was, you know, important. So it's boosting up confidence. It's creating that sense of, you know, satisfaction and involvement in something bigger. That's part of reciprocity, not just, you know, as you said, being paid for their time, but also the acknowledgement, and that's where co-research comes in general, I think. But yeah, dependent on the community as well. There might be situations where you go into a community like, in my experience, very limited experience, Tingha, they need more people to come in to help with grant writing applications and, you know, that sort of thing, so that then they can, you know, boost their community controlled organisation for the benefit of the community. So by being involved in research, even though that's not the purpose of the research, you can be involved in giving back in just those little ways. And that, you know, assists with your relationship, and that, yeah, contributes to reciprocity. Anyone else? Any other questions?
I've got a supplementary.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry, I just thought, just building on those wonderful answers, I was just thinking also about what Rakita said when she spoke as well, around being open to follow synergies and looking for relationship. And I think a number of you also mentioned that around my question, you know, responding about reciprocity. And I guess, is that then part of the challenge of then, and picking up on Peter's response as well, is part of this challenge is rethinking the way we do research away from, you know, very singular focus of a research project, to be then going to community and saying, actually, how do we bring together all these different topics and concerns and priorities you might have, like Nina was speaking about as well. How do we bring that together? And so we're doing research differently. We're doing it organically, and I guess, like Rakita was saying, following those synergies, and becomes, I think, more like an organic relationship with community. And then the reciprocity then fits within that model. Is that be a reasonable? I'm just trying to think it through practically, that how do we make it work better?
I guess my response to that is I look within my discipline of psychology, and we have a really strong tradition of quantitative research. Now, crunch the numbers for me. Tell me what the numbers are going to tell us. And clearly, we can't do that kind of research with community. Shoving questionnaires under people's noses is, in my opinion, quite disrespectful, and goes against what a lot of people have said today about giving people a voice. And so it's been a bit of a culture shift in my discipline to get people used to seeing qualitative research. I've even had some difficulty even getting a qualitative paper published. It's taken me 2 years, because there have been a lot of the publishers don't seem to get this. And it's as I say, it's a bit of a culture shift for, I think, many of the disciplines to understand that we do research differently because of our connection with community and giving people a voice.
Just briefly on that, I think research is changing, and I think it's organic, but the problem is it's very slow process because you're within an institution. Like when I first did my masters, started my masters, my supervisor told me I couldn't use myself as the first person when I was telling a story, and I'm telling my story, and he said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Then what's the point of me doing this? I'm trying to tell a story about my people." And I think that's changed over the years, but I think it is changed. I think it's organic, and we need to lead that change. We need to see different ways of doing researching, saying, working.
I think it's our time for community to research back now. We've been researched enough, and I think that if research keeps going the way it's going with just sort of this toasty, you know, if we're not leading it, there should be no research about us without us, that type of motif that Uncle Tom Comer was talking about. But I think it's just really our money, our investment should be in trying to build our community's capacity to research back, to say, well, why are you asking that question? What's that going to do for our healing or our responses? You know, one of the biggest underfunded research areas is the impact of the stolen generations, and it's still underfunded. It's still not addressed, but we know the layers of intergenerational trauma. So we need to be researching back. Why are you fellas coming in? You know, where are the stats and the statistics about the incompetencies of our health system or our systems that continually, say that we want to be part of our RAP plans or our advisory boards, but then they go and be racist the next day? You know, where is the accountability from the government's component? You know, where do we move? We're not going to do your research anymore. We're not going to be part of your system anymore. You know, that type of thing. I don't know, that's a bit political, but that's how I see it.
Felicity is clapping.
All research is political. All research is political.
I think that's everything.
So yeah, well, that was excellent. Excellent questions and responses. To a range of the issues that were discussed today. I guess in my reflections on what's happened today, when you first see the topic, health and art, you might just be a bit blasé about not understanding the relationship between health and art. But as we've gone through the day, we've started to peel back some of the layers and understand how effective art and craft is, not only to our health, which is important in all aspects of our health, from our mental health, social emotional well-being, to our physical health even. But what we've recognised, I guess, through the discussion is that we've got to look at the social determinants of health, those other things that impact on what makes us healthy or unhealthy. We've also, as we've gone along, talked about systemic discrimination and racism that exists within the health system and amongst health professionals, and that and I must say is not just in the mainstream. It does happen in some of our community controlled areas as well, where people don't feel welcomed and don't necessarily always feel safe. They're few and far between, those sort of cases, but we need to look at it. We need to acknowledge that, I guess. I think one of the big things that was evident was that the old mantra about don't do it about us without us in our research, and how do we make research responsive to our needs rather than other people's needs. And I think there are movements in that space, as I mentioned a bit earlier, with some of the big funding bodies and the directions that we're taking. We also learnt that there are quite a number of very, very good initiatives that are happening across universities, and we've seen a number of videos that highlight the panels and the Girali Centre and so forth, and some of the philosophies behind the way that they operate and their mode of operation, which is so important in thinking about this. But if we think more broadly about art, it's not only the health sector that it has an impact on, but it has a potential impact on the economy for people's own income generation, which then can address some of maybe the food insecurity that might exist or other pressures. We also heard about the impact of, when we drifted a little bit off art specifically, but looked at some of those big initiatives like respiratory ailments, asthmas, and how do we work with mums and bubs and bring an art perspective into that. Because art, I think, is a way that's a non-threatening way to get people together to be able to talk about issues. And in so doing, you're also being creative and getting back to looking at, you know, I think the three big aspects that drifted throughout, or that were mentioned throughout, was language, and recognizing that you know, language is so important, culture is so important, and land and connection to country is so important for our health and well-being. And it's not only in Australia, but globally we experience this with Indigenous peoples, and you know, that all becomes, you know, very important in the process. I should also mention that you know, within the health system itself, the issues, and Carmen, not concentrating, Carmen, wrote in her PhD looking at you know, the R word, and how racism has an impact across public policy and the way that activities are being held in our system. And I think AHPRA is now starting to get more seriously involved in cultural competency, as is you know, a number of the health professional groups getting involved. So we are seeing positive movement in this space. Doesn't mean we can take our foot off the pedal. We've got to continually raise awareness about this. I mentioned at the very beginning of today about you know, our unconscious biases that we all have to address, and how we get influenced by what we see or hear through mainstream media. And I think that is so important, and it's great to see, you know, a number of non-Indigenous health professionals and workers online today. And hopefully they, and I'm sure they wouldn't be online if they weren't interested, you know, in gaining a little bit more knowledge and helping to dispel some of the mythology that exists around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So you know, addressing our biases continually, all of us continually being on the front foot, you know, in doing it in a very respectful way, but maybe an assertive way, in helping to educate the community and some of our peers, our non-Indigenous peers particularly, and doing it so that we can all get the best outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and particularly in the health space, where we have to address, you know, all those causal factors as to why we are, you know, dying younger than everybody else. While we do have all the traumas that still exist, and some are being addressed meaningfully, others are just being dismissed, and we have to do it. And you know, there was the mention of the stolen generations, and it's, you know, there has been some very good work done through the Healing Foundation, and they've got a significant injection of funding in recent years to start to look at programs, and their work with the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare in trying to quantify the impacts of trauma on the stolen generations. And it's pretty woeful when you look at the outcomes, the health outcomes, and the employment, housing outcomes of not only members of the stolen generation, but their descendants, who are also impacted through those, you know, intergenerational traumas, and their participation in you know, education, employment, justice system, unacceptably, you know, out of step with even other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So, you know, they're all issues. But I think the good thing is that when we look at art and craft, it's a safe medium to be able to work with. It's something that enriches and enthuses people who get involved. It's a great opportunity to transfer knowledge and skills and share those, not only amongst ourselves, but with others. And you know, we also heard, you know, which is so true, that you know, we are not a homogenous society. We are many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across the nation, and we've got to be able to pay due respect to us as peoples. But you know, I think I'll leave with two things. One is that when we look at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health, we're looking at it holistically. We're not looking at it from an illness perspective only. That's important, but we've got to look at it from, you know, the social, emotional well-being, as well as the illness, as well as all those other determinant factors that impact on our health. So we see it holistically, whereas others will see it as an illness perspective. And I think, you know, Peter may have mentioned that, or you know, somebody else I heard mention, maybe Joe, that we have to look at it. And the last point I'll leave with is that, you know, what has been really encouraging is to see the early career researchers, our youth, our young people who are taking a lead role. And you know, that wonderful poem that we heard, and I wrote it down, about the elders and the role of elders, I think is something I'd love to reflect on again. And I think we all need to be able to reflect on that, and that elders have a role, but so do youth, so do our future leaders. And but you know, thank you, Kasani, for all of your work that you've done to help pull this together. I know John Skinner, Vita, also had a role to play. I guess Joe did as well. So you know, from the Jurali Centre, but it happens because we all have a common interest and a common interest to see better health outcomes for our people. So thank you all for your participation, and I'll sign off from that. So thank you.
Thank you. Incredible.